Hello and welcome, Success Great Nation, to this episode of the podcast. In this episode of the podcast, I have with me Larry Leigon. So I hope I pronounced your last name right.
That's plenty close enough. You got closer than the IRS gets. So
What is it? How do you spell it exactly?
lead, I spell it Leigon. They spell it Legion. And when I try to put my own name into the internet, it spell corrects me.
Hmm.
So the internet says I can't spell my own name.
Okay. So Larry is going to be talking about how to train and master your mind for business success. Larry is an entrepreneur and Aikido Blackbelt who has started four successful companies, two of which sold internationally in over 22 countries. He focuses on training the intention of the entrepreneur to remain calm under pressure and to respond to challenges that a company presents during periods of rapid growth. So Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hussein. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you are with me. We are going to be talking about a very important topic, which is mastering the mind as a business owner for business success, which is a very important thing. Like if we can control our minds, we can control everything in our life and business, and how we see our growth coming to fruition, I guess. So, but
Yeah.
because first of all, because this is the Success Secret podcast, and I will start by asking you throughout your career, throughout your experiences, throughout how do you work with other people, what does success means to you, and how do you see other people have certain misconceptions in regards to success?
I'm glad you asked that because that's actually really important to me. I mean, the way I define success, I got from Sensei, the guy who founded Aikido. And what he said was the only true victory is victory over yourself. So in the martial arts of Aikido, you're training, of course, to fight the attacker, but you're also training yourself. That's the important part of it. Training your mind to focus, you're training to be able to spontaneously generate responses to things, to align with the other person. So in doing those four startups, and the two especially that went international, I saw a lot of people who didn't realize the business is a mirror of their own mind. The business is a mirror of their own values, it's of their own actions. And so what happens is the business will go really well, and then it'll start to falter. And they'll think it's something in the business they have to change. But it's not something in the business they have to change. The thing in the business will change when they change. So you have to see what the mind does. In these cases, for instance, um, we did we applied NASA space technology to the traditional wine industry here in the United States. Eventually, that ended up with changing the way wines are made all over the world with new technology that we developed. But it also produced the world's only non-alcoholic wine to ever win a gold medal against wines with alcohol. And testing that, figuring out how to sell something that nobody necessarily even knew they wanted. Non-alcoholic wine doesn't make any sense to anybody. They don't. What would that be? But what happens is, for instance, we went into a focus group and we put the non-alcoholic wine in different containers, into a pitcher, into a wine bottle, into a mason jar, into a teapot. And we watched and had the 30 or so people rate them. Now, and guess what the price would be? Now, the thing that was the most startling was that they rated every single container differently, even though it was exactly the same wine and exactly the same taste. So they rated everyone differently, and they guessed a different price. So the one in the wine bottle got the highest price, but the one in the mason jar got the lowest price. But the thing was, the consumer's mind wasn't picking up the product, they were picking up the package. And so a lot of times, your product ends up being your package. And if you're worried about gross dollars, gross profit, turnover, and those kinds of things, the basics of business, then you got to figure out what the consumers are really buying. So they obviously weren't buying the stuff in the bottle. They were buying the bottle and the idea. Now it's totally different when we did the training for Hewlett Packard in the 80 countries worldwide, doing those training as a service. And in those places, they were buying the result. They wanted one single thing that they could walk away with. And so we end up being rated the second highest in Hewlett Packard worldwide, basing it on Aikido principles, just like what I'm talking about. I'm looking at my notes here to see if I missed something.
Yeah, so we are basically saying that usually people, when they buy whatever they want, they are buying, whether it's product or service, they are looking for the resolution of the thing that they are looking
That's
for.
right.
Usually, whatever I am buying, a course, a learning course, whatever. For example, I am taking a course right now on trade finance and whatever. So that's a big topic, right? But I don't
Right.
like going through the course and learning new things. But I do want to get to the end point, which is getting certified, for example.
Right. Right. Exactly. You've got a very clear goal in mind. And
Yeah.
it turns out you have to figure out what your consumer's goal is, because if you just ask them, they don't know. They'll tell you something else. They'll tell you something, but it won't be the thing. In this case, it ended up that the non-alcoholic wine in a wine package, then that was part of their identity. I mean, this was really deeply personal to them. It's not like Kleenex or it's a very personal thing because it reflects who they think they are. So they're buying their own identity. They're buying a reinforcement of their own identity. Now, of course, you have to do all the things you have to do in any business. You have to manage inventory, you have to manage accounts receivable and accounts payable, and you have to have a production line. You have to do all of the stuff that you have to do. But I realized that whatever the business itself was a mirror of me in any of those cases. So if there was a problem in the business, I took time to look into myself and try to find out where that weakness was. Everybody has a weakness. You have different personality styles. You have different ways of approaching things. We taught personality styles at Hewlett Packard, among other things. And consumers have personality styles too. But you have to find out what your weakness is and compensate one way or another. You either find somebody who can do what you can't do, or you train yourself to be able to do that. But for instance, I'm not an extrovert. I don't go out and just talk to strangers on the street. But if you're going to do sales, then you really it helps to be an extrovert. You don't have to be, but it really helps because you want to go out and contact people and find out about them and those things. So if I was going to do sales, I hired a whole separate sales company just to do that because I knew that wasn't my strength. My strength was conceptualizing the product, doing the research, finding out what they wanted, what they would pay for it, and why it mattered to them.
Yeah. So do you think that it's very important, like from what I understood that co- company is creating us. So in order to do that, we have to develop our own strength and not
Yes.
focus on the weaknesses and develop those strengths that we already have. And with building a company, like with the growth of the business, like we can get more people around us who are better than us in doing certain things. Like you mentioned sales in your example, and you mentioned being an introvert or an extrovert. Now, generally, um, I don't know about that, but sometimes from what I am seeing, sometimes people can be extroverted with other people, but introverted with other people. If I don't
Yes.
know if you know
Yeah.
what I
They
mean.
can change
Generally,
styles depending on who they're talking
some
to.
people don't like to deal with these certain people, so they seem to them that they are not some people who are social or whatever, but they
Yeah.
deal with different type of people. So we as a human sometimes uh, like to deal with people maybe like us, and you
Yes.
also find this type of people that would deal with everyone, with the kid, with the elderly, and
Yes.
younger people. So these are things that are one of the things that it's good, maybe in your experience, to know about ourselves, right? Because it also can help us in building different type of things in our business when we get more people coming into the business, employees, dealing with suppliers, dealing with middlemen, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. For 1 year there, we had 500% increase in the wine company. And then we had 3 more years of 300% or more a year after that. Then it leveled out to normal growth patterns. But if you have 500% a year growth, I would hire somebody on the first day of the month. By the 30th day of the month, their job was already obsolete. Things were changing so fast. You needed people who could improvise. You needed people who could read the situation and make their own decisions. And later, when it got leveled out and you're growing at 5 or 10% a year, then you need people who can repeat processes. You need people who can cut costs. You need people who react in those situations better. And I found, especially in the entrepreneurs, in Aikido, when you're attacked, one of the biggest things is to stay calm, because we're sworn not to hurt the attacker. The idea is that if someone's attacking you, they've already broken their basic connection to the universe, and they're the ones who are in trouble, not you. So as an entrepreneur, the business feels like trouble. It just feels like people are attacking you all the time. They're demanding this, they're demanding that, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. You have to find a way to train your own mind to stay calm in those situations. So there's certain meditation techniques, there's certain grounding techniques, centering techniques that you can do. And remember that you have a body. One of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs forget is they're in a body, and their body may be doing all kinds of things their mind is not doing. And so you're communicating a mixed message. You want to be aligned so that whatever you're communicating to whoever you're dealing with, it's the same thing all the time.
So you mentioned being calm and handling yourself under pressure, but do you think generally a business, whether it's a brick and mortar or online business, there is maybe some kind of a pressure? So do you think these kind of things, having pressure on the business owner, is a good thing, or do you think that we should always strive to go the other way and be calm and be stress free, or do you think we need to be like have some kind of a stress in the process?
Right. Yeah. In Aikido, we have what they call a training edge. So if you train with somebody who's a whole lot better than you and they just overwhelm you, you don't learn anything and you can't accomplish anything. If you train with somebody that's not trained at all, or that's so much lower in training than you are, then you don't get anything out of it. It's just not hard enough. So that training edge is the point at which you can still handle it, but you're having to work at handling it. And that's the only place that growth can come, from inside you, so the business can grow, because business is going to have different demands later.
So it's like kind of maybe a breaking point. We need to know where is the edge, and
Yes.
reach that edge and try not to go beyond it, because if we go beyond it, sometimes our mind, because we are talking about the mind, maybe the mind would explode of
And
ideas or of stress, of worries of the business, and sometimes life itself gets in the way. So there's a lot
yes,
of things
yes,
in our head. Like eventually, as a humans, we don't only think about the business itself. We think about the whole thing of our
the
whole
whole thing.
everything in our lives. So, and as we start to connect the dots here and there, some things work, some things don't, some things goes our way, some things don't go our way. But the important thing is, I would say, like, it is important that we take control of things that we can control, but
Yes,
also maybe in the circumstances of life and business and things in general, there are things that are out of our controls as humans, right?
yes,
So
yes,
that's very important, not to try to concern ourselves with things that are out of our control, don't you think?
yes, yes, absolutely. What happens in business is what happens in Aikido. That's what I modeled in the first place. But you have to master the basics of Aikido. There are basic techniques, there are basic blocks, there are basic all kinds of things, physical movements. There are also basic mental movements that you have to master. The same thing is true for an entrepreneur. You have to be able to master the basics of the business. You have to know about production. You have to know about marketing and sales. You have to know about accounts receivable. You have to know about cash management and those kinds of things. If you don't master those in the first place, then you get overwhelmed and your mind does blow up. I mean, you've got all kinds of other things happening in your life, and then the business can't succeed because you can't stay focused and you can't guide it in the direction it needs to go. But once you've mastered those basics, then it's a matter of staying calm and allowing your mastery, your unconscious mastery, to do what it does. It knows what to do. And part of what it does is in Aikido, it's called spontaneous generation of martial forms. That doesn't translate very well in English, but it means you spontaneously react to whatever is happening. But you have the tools to do it because you've already done enough repetitions with the business part. You've learned the parts of business, so you don't have to think about it. Generally speaking, research has shown it takes 300 repetitions to be able to do anything at all. It takes 3,000 to be able to do it under pressure. And it takes 10,000 repetitions to be able to master it. So you can imagine most entrepreneurs don't take the time to master all the aspects of business. They don't have to be the greatest world's expert, but they have to be good enough at their technique with a business that it can be unconscious. And then you can have people spontaneously respond in the moment to things as long as they stay calm. Now, if they tighten up or if they start trying to work things, then they're going to run into problem, because when you have resistance, and entrepreneurs all have resistance at all kinds of things, when you have resistance and you resist it, when you attack the attacker, then the attacker gets stronger. You can demonstrate this physically on the mat. Meeting resistance with resistance just makes the attacker stronger. So you have to be able to stay calm, connect with, in this case, the business or the attacker, and to move spontaneously without having to think things through. If you're an entrepreneur and you've got a company that's moving, you're getting 75, 100, 150 calls a day. You're having to make, I think at one point I had somebody count and I made at least 125 decisions a day. So you can't think through 125 decisions. You've got to be able to spontaneously do it. And you can only do that if you've mastered the basics of the business and you mastered the basics of your own mind.
So that's very important. Like it could be like about training ourselves, like you mentioned about the hours, 300 going 3,000 going 10,000. Like
Right.
we need times. We need to make habits. For example, I would say for training our not our physical self, but our minds to do certain things. And when we have this, let's say, accumulative hours, I would say like it would come naturally. That's why, for example, a lot of, uh, for example, basketball players can get a
Yes.
free throw and score 10
Yes.
times out of a 10 times because they have like a lot of talk about Michael Jordan used to practice like 1,000 shots or 500 shots
Right.
simply outside of training. So these kind of things you need in order to reach a level of mastery for ourselves, especially our minds. Because usually I actually heard some time ago a quote that the hardest thing for a human to do is to basically control our minds because this thing is easier to go in a way of the things that we have pleasure about. Like you have two options, A or
Right.
B. A has some kind of pleasure and have done it multiple times, and I know how it feels. B is something new and not sure how it's going to be. So we easily go with the flow with A, for example, option A, because we know it's going to make us feel good,
Right.
satisfied, and not take much risk. And it's easier for the mind instead of going back and forth and challenging ourselves to hit that, I would say, a wall of
That's
maybe shame,
exactly right.
right?
Yeah, basketball is a great example as an analog for business because they have to adjust in seconds, in the moment, to what the other person is doing. And in business, it's not just you doing things; you're getting other people's reactions back. And I think most people don't look into themselves enough to realize that their mind is just repeating things over and over. You repeat, I've heard different figures at different times, but 80% of your thoughts are the same thoughts over and over again. 80% of your emotions are the same emotions over and over again. So you've got this obsessive compulsive mind that is generating the same repetitive thoughts, the same repetitive emotions over and over. The reason to stay calm is to be able to get separation from that so that you're not just automatically emotionally or intellectually reacting to what's happening, that you have some sense of yourself and that you can move on your own decisions, not just because somebody else did something.
That's very important. The issue
Yeah.
is sometimes I see you talked about decisions. It's sometimes hard to see yourself in a place for not being able to make a decision, especially for the
Right.
business, because that's very important. Because usually these type of situations will happen definitely multiple times throughout the time and of the business, right? So that's very important. We need to be kind of decisive. We need to be the leaders of ourselves and be, even if we maybe made some kind of a mistake, because eventually mistakes could happen. But the important thing is, like you talked about earlier, being calm under the pressure and review things, making things in order, and taking certain necessary steps to fix things if they were wrong, or to build and improve on things if they were going the good way or the right way.
That's exactly right. And to read the reactions on the floor, just like your Michael Jordan example, you have to practice a lot, but you also, when you're playing the game, you have to see, you have to realize what the other people are doing. You have to be observant. You have to be aware of what they're doing. So you have to build your own awareness, just like they did on the basketball court.
Yeah. So throughout your business and careers and what you do with people, what is the, let's say, maybe the worst advice and also the best advice that you have personally received in regards to uh, to 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 business in general, and also how the human mind works and how we can, let's say, uh, remove the distractions away.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst advice I ever got's easy because it's from a great business school. I went to Stanford University extension classes, and um, they were giving me what colleges and universities always give. You can go to Harvard, you can go to any of them. And what they will do is they will have all this analytical tools. So they'll put things on spreadsheets, they'll have formulas, they'll have sometimes even calculus being used to figure things out, to make decisions. But the fact is, that's not the way decisions are made in the real world. When I was making decisions for both companies, I would have to make a decision today, but I wouldn't see the financials for 3 to 6 months. So what I was getting back from the accountants, from the measure that those Harvard and Stanford are using to make decisions, it was already 6 months too late to make that decision. So you have to be able to make a decision based on your own knowledge and experience, and also on your own ability to read what's happening in the moment. And you hope for the best. I think really, I don't know that anyone's ever measured this, but I would be shocked if any entrepreneur ever made any worse than 50-50 decisions or any better. I think half the time you're right, half the time you're wrong. It's not that you make the right decision. It's that when you make a decision, you look and see what happens, and then you adjust to that situation. So somebody who makes 80% correct decisions, I've never seen that. The only place I've ever seen that's when they're in Harvard and they're looking at something from 5 years ago, you know? So you've got to be able to manage yourself, and that automatically manages the business. The business is a mirror of you. What you're not managing in yourself, you're not managing in the business.
Mm, definitely. So in regards to the best advice,
Oh, best advice. Best advice comes from me. So I'm trying to figure out a way not to say it came from me. From the time I was born, I I listened to other people. I wanted to know what they said. Uh, I cared about learning things. financial statements, selling, whatever. But I listened only to myself. Ultimately, I was the one who made the decision. So the best advice that I ever had was given to me: be yourself and trust your own instincts and your own mind. Now, you can't do that if you're just beginning, if you don't have the skills, if you don't have the experience. But if you're experienced, don't listen to anybody, would be the best advice I would give someone. That's opposite, of course, what you usually hear, but it's not that they're wrong even necessarily. It's that they're not inside you and they're not inside your business. So the production person always has different advice than the salesperson. They're just opposite in every way: cash use, and mental attitudes and values and everything. So if you listen to what other people tell you from the outside, if I'd done what Stanford told me to do, or if I'd done what Harvard says to do, I wouldn't have succeeded, because that's not the real life. Real life is alive and well, and it's happening in the moment. It's not going to be pinned down to a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's sometimes important to realize that you are in the middle of things. Sometimes people from the outside, yes, they can see certain things different or have different perspective, but at the same time, you are in the eye of the tornado, I guess. So,
Yes.
so you need to measure things in a good way. So what would you personally recommend business owners or entrepreneurs as tools, resources, or books?
Um, for tools, I would tell them, well, first of all, I would tell them master the business basics. So look at Stanford and Harvard, read books there on your basic financials. You got to know your financial sheets. You got to know your production lines. You got to know the end-to-end process and all those kind of things. So any of those things, the Harvard Business Review is an excellent place to find out standard business information. Stanford has a similar magazine that's the same. But for these other things, do something that requires improvisation. In my case, it's Aikido, but you could be a musician, you could be an artist. Uh, do something that causes you to inquire into yourself. So I follow NLP, Neuro Linguistic Program. That was I was trained for 2 years in that, and I use that to model things like the mental process or the Aikido process or whatever. So I would look at books in NLP. Robert Dilts is probably the leader um, of the most on the forward edge of thinking of that. Um, but they're much more modern books too. But the modern books would be things that you wouldn't think an entrepreneur would look at. They would be meditation things. They would be self-inquiry and self-awareness things. Now, of course, Daniel Goleman wrote Emotional Intelligence many years ago, but his basic premise was the same. You have to first recognize what you feel inside. Then you have to manage what you feel inside. Then you have to recognize what the other person or group is feeling, and then you have to manage that. So if you haven't read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, I would think that would be a great place to start to get some basics. He went eventually to the Dalai Lama and modeled various things there as well. In terms of staying calm, that's a matter of training your attention. You have to train your attention. So I tell people I work with, I tell them, look, first sit down, shut up, and don't move for 15 minutes. Now, most of them can't do that. Most of them can't sit down and be quiet and not move. So I said, okay, if you can't do it in 15 minutes, do it in 5 minutes, do it in 3 minutes, do it for 30 seconds. But sit down, be quiet, and don't move. And that's just a very, very first step toward meditation. And knowing your own mind, because when you sit there and you're quiet, and if you can make 15 or 20 minutes, then you start to notice your own mind. You start to see how many repetitions, how many obsessive compulsive things. You start to feel like you have to move, you have to think about this, you have to do this, you have to do this other thing. I have to act. But a lot of times you do have to act, but you need to be centered in your own mind first. So if you can sit still for 15 minutes, that's the first step. Later on, you can do other things. You can learn to notice your own thoughts. You can learn to do things both open-eyed and closed-eyed, stare at something, a flower, a car, a honey, whatever it
The
is.
sky, yeah.
The sky, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Just look
Larry,
at that.
yeah, where can people learn more about you and what you do, and they contact you?
Yeah, I think I gave you my Calendly link. I can send that back to you if you don't have it, but that's the easiest place because you can make a free appointment and I'll talk to you for 30 minutes and we'll go over whatever's on your mind, whatever you're thinking about and that kind of stuff. If you don't want to make an appointment on Calendly, then you can email me. And it's just my name. It's Larry at LarryLeigon.com. And Leigon is Leigon. Larry at LarryLeigon.com. I'm happy to answer questions. No stupid questions. I've learned usually the most stupid questions are the ones that teach me the most. So I'm happy to hear from people.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Larry, for being with me on this episode of the Success Grade podcast. The most important thing as a business or an entrepreneur is to first to calm down, take the pressure off, and think straight, and then
Yes,
start over if there is something wrong.
yes. That's exactly right. Don't
Thank you.
start correcting things outside you until you've corrected things inside of you.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Hussein. I really enjoyed it. You got a great podcast. I love it. So I've been listening to some of the episodes. Thank you very much.